places in this world where the fabric of reality is worn thin by the weight of violence. These are coordinates on a map where history refuses to become the past, where the echo of a scream never truly fades, but instead becomes a permanent frequency in the atmosphere. We like to believe that when a crime is committed, when a tragedy occurs, the horror ends when the police tape is removed and the headlines fade. But there is one house in the American Midwest that stands as a defiant, terrifying counterargument to that belief. It is a structure that trapped the final, agonizing moments of 8 souls within its timber and plaster, creating a vacuum of dread that has persisted for more than a century. This is a true story documented in historical records, court transcripts, and in the terrified testimonies of those who have dared to cross its threshold. Welcome to Nocturnal Ledger. To understand the darkness that resides in the small town of Villisca, Iowa, we must first strip away the modern world. We must go back to a time before digital forensics, before DNA profiling, and before the internet connected every corner of the globe. The year is 1912. In the early 20th century, Villisca was not a place of fear. It was a thriving, idyllic community, a portrait of the American dream carved out of the fertile soil of the heartland. It was a town where neighbors left their doors unlocked, where the railway brought prosperity, and where the church was the center of social life. On the evening of June 9th, 1912, the sky over Villisca was heavy with low-hanging clouds, and the air thick with the humidity typical of an Iowa summer. It was a Sunday. At the Presbyterian Church, the community had gathered for the annual Children's Day service. It was a celebration of innocence. Among the families present were the Moores. Josiah Moore was 43 years old, a prominent businessman, successful and well-liked by many, though not without his rivals. Beside him was his wife, Sarah, 39 years old, a woman known for her devotion to her family. With them were their 4 children, 11-year-old Herman, 10-year-old Catherine, 7-year-old Boyd, and little 5-year-old Paul. The service ended around 9:30 in the evening. The atmosphere was joyous. The children had recited their verses and sung their hymns. As the Moores prepared to walk home, they were joined by 2 guests. Alina and Ina Stillinger, aged 12 and 8, were the daughters of friends who lived out in the country. The girls had asked to stay over at the Moore house that night to avoid a dark travel home late in the evening. It was a decision that would seal their fate. The group of 8 walked through the quiet streets of Villisca. The street lamps cast long, flickering shadows against the gravel. They arrived at the white frame house on East 2nd Street. It was a modest, comfortable home, a symbol of Josiah's hard work. They went inside, locked the doors, a rarity for the time, but perhaps Josiah felt a flicker of intuition, a primal warning he couldn't quite articulate, and prepared for bed. The Stillinger girls were given the guest room on the 1st floor. The Moore family ascended the narrow, creaking staircase to the 2nd floor. By midnight, the house was silent. What happened next is a reconstruction based on the blood-soaked evidence found the following morning and the century of forensic analysis that followed. Sometime after midnight, a figure emerged from the shadows. To this day, we do not know if the killer was lying in wait inside the house, hiding in a closet or the coal cellar, or if they slipped in through a back door with a key. What we do know is that the killer possessed a level of malice that defies comprehension. The weapon of choice was an axe, belonging to Josiah Moore himself. which had been taken from the coal shed. The intruder moved with the silence of a phantom. The first stop was the master bedroom upstairs. Josiah and Sarah lay asleep. The killer did not hesitate. The blade of the axe was not used. Instead, the killer used the blunt end, the pole of the axe, swinging it with such ferocious force that the couple never woke. It is believed Josiah was struck first, the violence so extreme that it raised the headboard of the bed. Sarah was next. The killer then moved from room to room. The children, Herman, Catherine, Boyd, and Paul, were all asleep in the adjacent room. The darkness of the house was absolute, save for the faint glow of an oil lamp the killer had altered. The chimney of the lamp had been removed, and the wick was turned down so low it barely cast a shadow, just enough light to see the sleeping forms of the children. One by one, the life was crushed out of them. There were no screams recorded by neighbors, no gunshots, just the sickening thud of iron against bone and the heavy breathing of a monster. After extinguishing the Moore bloodline, the killer descended the stairs. In the guest room off the kitchen, Lena and Ina Stillinger slept. Evidence suggests that Lena, the older of the two, might have woken up. Her body was found positioned in a way that suggested a defensive recoil, perhaps hearing the footsteps on the stairs or the creak of a floorboard. But escape was impossible. The axe fell again and again. But the horror of the Villisca house is not just in the act of murder. It is in the ritualistic behavior that followed. The killer did not flee immediately. They stayed. They lingered in the house with the 8 corpses. The killer took cloths and clothing found in the drawers and covered the faces of every victim. They also covered the mirrors in the house. Every piece of reflective glass was draped with cloth. Was it superstition? Was it shame? Or was it a fear that the souls of the dead would be trapped in the glass, staring back at the murderer? Furthermore, the killer retrieved a 2-pound slab of unsliced bacon from the icebox and placed it on the floor of the guest bedroom, alongside a keychain. A bowl of water was found, bloody, where the killer had washed their hands. The axe was left leaning against the wall in the room where the Stillinger girls lay. It was a scene of controlled chaos, a tableau of madness carefully arranged before the sun rose. By the time the killer slipped away into the pre-dawn mist, locking the door behind them, the house on East 2nd Street had been transformed from a family home into a crypt. The discovery of the bodies the next morning, June 10th, shattered the psyche of the town. Mary Peckham, who was the next-door neighbor, noticed the house was unusually quiet. The chores were not done. The curtains were drawn. She called Josiah's brother, Ross Moore. When Ross arrived, he unlocked the door with his own key and stepped into the kitchen. He opened the door to the guest bedroom and saw the blood-soaked sheets. He screamed. That scream marked the end of innocence for Villisca. The investigation that followed was a disaster of contamination. Word spread like wildfire. Before the authorities could secure the scene, hundreds of townspeople pushed their way into the house. They walked through the blood, touched the walls, and gaped at the bodies. One of the most vital crime scenes in American history was trampled by the morbid curiosity of the public. By the time the National Guard arrived to restore order, our critical evidence had likely been destroyed or moved. Yet, despite the chaos, clues remained, and suspects emerged. The list of those accused reads like a cast of characters from a Gothic novel, each adding a layer of complexity to the mystery. The first was Frank Jones, an Iowa state senator and a fierce business rival of Josiah Moore. Moore had left Jones's employment to start his own implement business, taking the lucrative John Deere franchise with him. Rumors swirled that Jones had hired a hitman to settle the score. While no hard evidence ever linked Jones to the crime, the town was divided into factions, neighbor turning against neighbor, cementing a paranoia that would last for decades. Then there was Lynn George Jacqueline Kelly, an English traveling minister with a history of sexual deviancy and mental instability. Munner Kelly had been at the Children's Day service. He had watched the Moore family. He left town on a train early the next morning, reportedly telling fellow passengers about the murders before the bodies had even been discovered. He later confessed to the crimes, claiming God told him to slay the utterly wicked. But he later recanted, claiming police brutality. He was tried twice. The first ended in a hung jury, the second in an acquittal. Another terrifying possibility was William Mansfield, a serial killer suspected of similar axe murders in Kansas, Colorado, and Illinois. The signature was the same: a house near the railroad tracks, the use of a weapon found on the scene, the covering of mirrors, and the use of the lamp without a chimney. A Department of Justice agent named Wilkerson became obsessed with proving Mansfield was the killer, hired by Senator Jones. But Mansfield had an alibi, a payroll record from a job in Illinois, though many believed the record was forged. Ultimately, despite grand jury hearings, private investigations, and decades of speculation, no one was ever convicted. The person who walked into that house and slaughtered 8 people walked free. They lived out their life, perhaps sitting next to people on a train, or standing in line at a grocery store, carrying the secret of that rainy June night to their grave. But while the legal case went cold, the house itself began to warm with a different kind of energy. In the years that followed, the house changed hands many times. It was occupied by various families, some of whom stayed for years, while others fled after only a short time. They whispered of strange occurrences. They spoke of a heaviness in the air that made it difficult to breathe. They reported the sound of footsteps pacing the upstairs hallway when no one was there. It wasn't until the house was restored to its 1912 condition in the 1990s and opened as a museum that the true extent of the supernatural activity began to be documented. This is not merely a case of local folklore. The phenomena reported at the Villisca Axe Murder House have been consistent, specific, and corroborated by thousands of visitors, paranormal investigators, and skeptics alike. The house stands today exactly as it did that night. The furniture is period accurate. The wallpaper, the bedding, the toys. It is a time capsule of trauma. When you step inside, the first thing that hits you is the smell. It is an old metallic scent, often described as a mixture of wet wood and copper. Many visitors report an immediate physical reaction: nausea, dizziness, or a sudden crushing headache that vanishes the moment they step back outside. The auditory phenomena are among the most chillingly documented aspects of the location. We're not talking about the settling of an old house. We're talking about the distinct, unmistakable sound of children. Late at night, when the town is asleep, researchers have recorded the sound of marbles rolling across the wooden floorboards of the upstairs bedrooms. There are recordings known as electronic voice phenomena, or EVPs, that have captured the sound of a child crying, "He's gonna hurt us," and the whisper of a man's voice growling, "Oh, get out." One of the most active areas in the house is the closet in the upstairs bedroom where the Moore children died. there is a documented report from a team of investigators who sat in the dark, asking questions. When they asked, "Who is in this room?" a flashlight that had been placed on the floor, turned off and screwed tight, suddenly flickered to life. It didn't just turn on. It blinked in response to questions. One blink for yes, two for no. The intelligence behind the light claimed to be one of the Moore children. But then, the atmosphere shifted. The air grew freezing cold, a sudden drop of 20 degrees recorded on thermal equipment. And the flashlight was violently knocked over by an unseen force. The stairs themselves are a focal point of terror. It was on these stairs that the killer walked up to the parents, and then down to the guests. Visitors frequently report the sensation of being pushed or shoved while ascending the stairs. Some have felt hands gripping their ankles. There is a psychological weight on the staircase, a feeling of being hunted. But perhaps the most disturbing recurring phenomenon centers around the guest room where Lena and Ina Stillinger died. This room is widely considered the epicenter of the darker energy in the house. It was here that the axe was left. It was here that the killer spent the most time post-mortem. Women who enter this room often report feeling sexually threatened or physically assaulted. There are police reports filed by visitors who have emerged from that room with scratches on their bodies. 3 distinct red welts appearing on their skin, burning as if etched by invisible fingers. Skeptics, of course, have attempted to debunk these claims. They cite infrasound, low-frequency sound waves that can cause hallucinations and feelings of dread, possibly caused by passing trains or wind drafting through the old chimney. They argue that the power of suggestion, the priming of the mind by the gruesome history, causes visitors to manifest their own fears. They say the brain, when placed in a dark, quiet environment known for murder, will create patterns out of random noise. However, these theories fail to explain the physical evidence. How does infrasound cause a heavy wooden door to slam shut and latch itself when there is no draft? How does psychological priming explain multiple unrelated witnesses hearing the exact same sentence whispered in their ear at the same time? How does pareidolia explain fresh scratches appearing on a person's back, under their clothing, in a room they occupied alone? There is a specific account from a seasoned paranormal investigator who spent the night alone in the house in 2014. He set up a static camera in the parents' bedroom. Around 3 a.m., the time known as the witching hour, and roughly the time the killer would have been finishing their grisly work, the investigator heard a heavy, rhythmic thudding. It sounded like wood chopping. Thud, thud, thud. He froze. The sound was coming from the room next to him. When he gathered the courage to enter, the room was empty, but on the audio recorder he had left running, underneath the sound of his own terrified breathing, was a faint, rasping sound. When enhanced, the audio revealed a voice whispering a single name: Paul. The tragedy of Villisca is not just that 8 people died, it is that they seem unable to leave. The prevailing theory among supernatural experts is that the violence of the act was so sudden, so traumatic, that it scarred the location itself. This is known as a residual haunting, a recording of history playing over and over again. The sounds of the children crying, the footsteps, the thuds, these are echoes trapped in the environment. But there is also evidence of an intelligent haunting. This is when the entities are aware of the living, the manipulation of flashlights, the physical touching of visitors, the specific responses to questions. These suggest that something conscious remains in the house. Some believe it is the spirits of the children, confused and terrified. He's still hiding from the man with the axe. Others believe that the killer himself, or the dark energy that drove him, is bound to the house, an eternal warden of the pain he inflicted. In recent years, the house has become a destination for those seeking a brush with the darkness. Tours are booked months in advance. People pay to sleep in the rooms where the murders happened. It is a macabre industry, but it serves a purpose. It keeps the memory of the Moors and the Stillingers alive. It ensures that the injustice done to them is never forgotten. Yet, there is a warning that comes with the territory. Those who have spent significant time in the Villisca Axe Murder House often speak of a lingering effect. The horror doesn't always stay in Iowa, always stay in. Some visitors report a spiritual attachment, a feeling of depression or anxiety that follows them home. They have nightmares of a man standing at the foot of their bed, holding something heavy in his hand. They wake up smelling the metallic scent of blood and wet coal. The historical records show us the facts: the date, the weapon, the names of the victims. But the facts cannot convey the reality of what it feels like to stand in that kitchen as the sun goes down. The facts cannot explain why, more than 100 years later, grown men break down in tears for no apparent reason when standing in the children's bedroom. The facts cannot explain the shadow figures captured on film, standing in the window, watching the world go by. As we analyze the Villisca Axe Murder House, we are forced to confront the limitations of our understanding, and we live in a rational world of cause and effect. But in that white frame house at the end of a quiet street, the rational world breaks down. The timeline fractures. The veil lifts. Was it a drifter? A political assassin? A psychotic preacher? The answer lies buried in the cemetery at the edge of town, where the Moors and Stillingers rest, or where we hope they rest. But if the evidence from the house is to be believed, they are not in the cemetery. They are still there, in the dark, waiting for the sun to rise on a morning that never comes. The horror of Villisca is not just a story of the past. It is a living, breathing entity. It serves as a reminder that some acts of violence are so profound that they stain the earth itself. The killer stripped the beds, covered the mirrors, and locked the doors, thinking he could hide his sin. But the house remembers. The walls remember. And if you listen closely to the silence of the Iowa plains, you might just hear the sound of a train whistle in the distance, and beneath it, the soft, terrified weeping of children who should have woken up on a Monday morning, but instead found themselves trapped in an eternal night. This has been a journey into the archives of the unexplained. The ledger has been opened, the account read. The mystery of the Villisca Axe Murder House remains one of the most chilling chapters in American history, a testament to the fact that while the dead may be gone, they are not always silent. Sleep well, if you can. This is Nocturnal Ledger, closing the book for now.